นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะ 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 พุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings to you all on this auspicious day, Visakha Puja or Vesak. It's the full moon day in May when we remember the birth of the Bodhisattva, the full awakening of the Buddha, and then the Parinibbana, the entering of Parinibbana, the passing away of the Buddha. I think most of you and myself and many other Buddhists all over the world, we use this time to partly remember the life story of the Buddha, his personal story, as much as we know. And most people find that very inspiring. There may be certain incidents or aspects of the Buddha's life story that you particularly find inspiring. Some people remember particular teachings of the Buddha that they associate. As soon as they hear that teaching, or as soon as they think of the Buddha, that teaching pops up. One that is often quoted is Nati Panya Sama Apa. There's no light as radiant as the light of wisdom. Panya. And they say it's one of the qualities of the Buddha. He had Maha Panya, great wisdom. The wisdom not only to free his own mind from suffering, but also the wisdom to teach others and to do that successfully. The Buddha could teach human beings to become devas, could teach devas to become brahmas, and brahmas to become aryas. That could all be within one human mind, one human lifespan, but also maybe acknowledging the fact that sometimes to reach Nibbana, we have to practice over a long period of time. But the Buddha had the ability to teach people, to raise them up from a place of suffering, attachment, struggles, to a place where they're going beyond those struggles, going to raising their mind through the practice. So when we say could teach a human to become a deva, could bring up the qualities of a deva, a celestial being, in the mind of a human through hearing the Dhamma and then following the Buddhist path. Particularly, they say, listening to the Dhamma from a Buddha brings up this quality of hiri ottappa, sense of shame and fear of unwholesome action. And you hear the teaching of the Buddha, that's one thing you start to appreciate, is that our actions in life have consequences, have results. And unwholesome, or actions rooted in unwholesome roots, greed, anger, delusion, will bring suffering as their consequence. And nobody wants to suffer. So most people, I think, that's often the beginning of their practice in Buddhist path, is to recognize how karma is at work in their life, in their mind, and start to shy away from perhaps the worst extremes of negative karma, negative action, even negative thoughts. You could say this is the arising of panya, wisdom. It's like a light shining into your heart, into your mind, illuminating things that maybe you didn't see before, you didn't notice before. When you start observing, looking, particularly if you start practicing meditation, developing mindfulness, it's like your mind becomes brighter and clearer, so then you see things that before you missed or just didn't know about. You see your own karma, you see cause and effect, you see, if you are stressed or suffering, you start to see where it's coming from, and also what you can do about it. How can you let it go? This is all wisdom, like a light turning on in your mind. They say when the Buddha started teaching, or when he first became enlightened, it's like this amazing radiant light started emanating in the universe. Perhaps some people didn't see it, probably most people didn't see it, but some people did. Some people have the eyes to see, that people, particularly people who meditate and already have some wisdom and understanding, maybe they noticed the radiance of the Buddha. And there's stories of people meeting the Buddha and observing this kind of radiant aura emanating from the Buddha. This is coming from the wisdom of the enlightened mind. It literally brightens up the mind of the individual, but also everywhere around as well. So whether it's in our own minds, cultivating wisdom through practice, particularly listening to the Dhamma, reflecting on it, meditating, developing mindfulness, or the light in the mind of the Buddha. This is something that, what does light do? It drives out darkness, or it breaks up darkness. So if you have a powerful light, anywhere that's dark, you can shine into that place. So you have a room or a space that's dark, you shine the light, the darkness disappears, doesn't it? It's because of the power of that light and the radiance of that light. This is like the effect of wisdom on the human mind. When you reflect on things, you start to understand things better and you're more aware, more mindful. It's like light coming into your mind. And it reveals things, shows you things. Just like when you shine a torch or a light into a dark room. So the effect of the Buddha arising in the world was a bit like that. It's like this amazing, super-powered floodlight starting up in the universe that wasn't there before. Maybe at first many people didn't realize, but anyone who came in contact with the Buddha did start to realize just what a wise, peaceful being he was, and then started benefiting from his teachings. And that could be you. Even though the Buddha is no longer with us physically, the wisdom of the Buddha in the teachings and the ways of practice that we can develop are still here. So one moment of mindfulness, if you apply your mind, particularly if you practice meditation, you apply your mind to bringing up mindfulness, or one moment of investigation of the truth, and your mind can understand and let go of something very negative or some kind of suffering that you're experiencing. Well, this is the effect of wisdom. This is the light coming into your mind. They say the true wisdom will drive out the darkness of suffering, and the suffering will never return. So often we have kind of patchy wisdom. We sort of understand something, we sort of know something is, a certain way of thinking is bringing us suffering, but we don't fully get it yet, we don't fully understand. So it may return, the suffering may return, we make the same mistake again. Well, that's always possible. But true wisdom brings a kind of a permanent change to the human mind. Maybe in small steps, but sooner or later there's permanent changes for the better in the mind. And the Buddha even measured that out in his teachings and said, well, there's 4 stages of enlightenment. The stream winner, the once returner, the non-returner, and then the arahant, what we call Arya, Pugalas, noble ones. So even you can measure this light in your human mind that arises as a result of practice. As we become wiser, you can measure that. It leads to certain changes. So the Buddha, started off by saying, well, try not to do evil things. It's the first level of wisdom, is just learning that much, not to do evil things that hurt yourself and hurt others. And the more you learn that lesson, it's like this wisdom, the light of wisdom, becomes established in your heart. Even though you still have attachments and problems, and sometimes you have not very good mental states, but maybe you stop acting on them through your speech, your actions, what we call sila, morality. That's already one, you might say, one level of wisdom. Somebody once asked Ajahn Chah, they said, why do people keep sila? And he says, because they're wise. To keep sila, to keep precepts, to refrain from hurting others through your speech and actions, you need some wisdom. You need the light of wisdom that sees, oh, this is harmful, this is going to cause me suffering or them suffering or both. So wisdom, in the first instance, leads us to be restrained in our behavior, to restrain the worst effects of evil, unwholesome mental states. They may still arise in your heart because your wisdom is not yet complete or so bright that you've abandoned all unwholesome mental states, but maybe you, first of all, you just learn not to put them into action. You have the thought you want to throttle that person because you're annoyed with them. You have anger, but you don't do it because you know it's wrong. It will lead you to suffer, and them, of course. So they say the first level of enlightenment, the Sotapanna, they no longer break the 5 precepts. The intention to kill, to steal, for example, to hurt others, has gone from their heart. So that's a bit of darkness has been replaced by a bit of light. May not be the full light of an arahant, who is completely non-attached to anything, but there's a certain level of light that's flooded into the heart, the mind of the Sotapanna, and so they don't have any more evil intentions to speak or act in a way that will hurt others. They have precepts, they have sila established. It comes from wisdom, and it supports the deepening of wisdom. These different aspects of the practice reinforce and support each other. So wisdom supports the practice of sila. Sila supports wisdom. Wisdom and sila support samadhi. Samadhi and sila support wisdom, and so on. Each aspect of the path supports the other aspects. And little by little, you could say, as we practice the Dhamma, the light becomes brighter in each person's mind the more they practice, and then the darkness of suffering starts to fade out. How quickly this process takes place, well, that all depends on the individual and their karma and their effort, but we're so lucky that the Buddha gave us an understanding. At least he gave us the teaching first off. He couldn't do it for us. He always made that clear. He said, I can't practice for you. You've got to do it yourself. But he gave us the structure and the way to do it. Gave us the guidelines, the teachings, the suttas and the Vinaya and the Abhidhamma. And it's for us, each individual, to put into practice. Many people, they find when they hear some Dhamma, straight away it makes sense. Especially if you've heard some Dhamma before, you've already got a taste for it and have already practiced to some level. You hear the Dhamma, already it makes good sense. And this is a little bit of that wisdom shining again. Like, the ways of the world often don't make much sense, do they? You wonder why people do the things they do half the time. Why do they hurt each other? Why do they compete and destroy the world in different ways? Why do they waste their time? People are born, but they often waste their time doing things that are not very helpful to them or others, and so on. You often wonder about that. But when you hear Dhamma, it's the opposite. The Dhamma says, oh, this makes sense. The words of the Buddha or a wise teacher make sense. And they lead you on to do things that are useful, helpful to you and to others. So this reflection on wisdom being like light and suffering being like darkness, I've always found very helpful. Sometimes you sense light and dark, just it can be with your intellect, or can be just on the level of feeling, emotion. There's different ways we sense what is the way out of suffering and what is the way into more suffering. You sense it, you find out in different ways through your practice. That partly depends on your character. But just the general idea that, wisdom is when things make sense and that understanding is supportive of freeing your mind from suffering. You're seeing something you didn't see before, knowing something that you didn't know before. What do we need for that? Well, the Buddha encouraged us to develop more awareness, more mindfulness over and over again through our life, so that we're learning to come back and look at ourselves, be more aware of ourselves. Unfortunately, our society and culture encourages us always to look outwards at the world, to gain knowledge from other people and other external sources, which can be useful, but often it's at the price we pay is that we neglect to look at our own minds, our own hearts and minds, and we miss the opportunity to improve them. As human beings, we have amazing potential, even the potential for enlightenment. And the Buddha himself was a human being. He was born as a human being, so it's not like he was some special, supernatural, godlike figure. He was still a human being, although he had many special qualities. He's still human. And the potential for enlightenment is within each one of us. But unfortunately, often we don't really develop it very far because we get so caught up in the world. Spend all our time working and traveling and seeking out entertainments and happiness in what we say worldly ways, that we neglect the ability to develop this inner wisdom that really brightens and frees the mind from suffering. So one of the Buddha's messages, and Vaisakha Puja is a good time to reflect on that, is spend more time cultivating your own mind. Not to neglect the world around you and other people and the world. We also want to improve that, but don't neglect your own mind, and don't spend so much time helping the world or focusing on the world to the point where you don't really develop your potential as a human being. You can do both together. As we practice the Buddhist path, it's like the acrobat and his daughter. The daughter was very smart, and she said, well, I'm going to make sure I do my part of the act properly, and that way I'll protect you as well. Whereas the father got it wrong. He said, oh, you protect me, I'll protect you. That doesn't work so well. If you're always looking out to protect other people but you're not looking at yourself, you miss things, don't you? And you're not successful in protecting others then either. So the Buddhist approach is, well, you take responsibility and look after your own mind, your own life first, then you'll be in a good position to help others and do good things for the rest of the world. It's another thing I always found inspiring about the Buddhist teachings. It seemed to get the balance right. You have to start with yourself before you can do much for other people. If you neglect your own mind, whereas like some of that, the light of that wisdom isn't really arising, is it? And then you're still caught into darkness, your own suffering, your own stress. And to go and help other people is only going to have limited success. And the Buddha himself practiced that, didn't he? He spent his time practicing first, getting his own understanding straight, experiencing Nibbana, enlightenment, on the night of his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. But that was a culmination of a few years of practice. It's only then that he went out to start teaching. He said, I'm not going to teach until I fully understood my own suffering and how to free my mind from suffering. And then all his teachings came from that. The Buddha fully understood how a human mind gets caught into stress and suffering, how we attach to craving, clinging, attached to the body and mind as self, attached to all our emotions as a self, and that's where all the problem starts. He understood that when you develop more mindfulness and investigate, you can see this attachment and this sense of self is a delusion. What we have to do to be free from suffering is actually let go. Let go of the craving, let go of the clinging. Then the mind starts to brighten up. And then his teachings were also explaining how to do that over and over again in different ways. So the Buddha spent all his time doing that first until he was thoroughly competent at it, expert at abandoning suffering and freeing his mind from suffering, and then he went out and started teaching others. Unfortunately, sometimes we get it wrong and we think, the best way is to go out and teach everyone else first, tell them what they should be doing, make a name for ourselves, and then we neglect our own practice, and we find in the end that maybe people don't really listen to us because we're not fully speaking from full wisdom and understanding. And also we used all our energy up trying to help or teach others, and we've neglected our own practice. So the Buddha was a good example in his own practice. He experienced enlightenment first and then started teaching. He didn't rush out to teach first. He had the wish to help others. He said one of the reasons he kept practicing, his motivation was out of compassion for all beings. But he also was very wise at the same time, and he knew, if I haven't fully understood the way to free the human mind from suffering, what's the point of going teaching others? What I teach them will be incomplete. So first of all, he had to complete the course, as it were, for himself. And then he started teaching others. That's why when you start practicing and you have doubts arise, can I do it? Is it worth it? There's often one of the biggest problems for people practicing Buddhism is they always have a doubt, and then they start thinking, well, maybe I should be going and doing something else, somewhere else, for somebody else. Often, say you go on a retreat or even just sitting down to meditate once, you often are struggling with thoughts, maybe I should be doing something else. Doubt comes up. And this is one of the biggest hindrances and biggest problems if you're training your mind. And it's a form of darkness. Doubt is a form of darkness. It's the opposite of wisdom, which is light again. Doubt stops you practicing, stops you doing good, stops you developing the right qualities. Paralyzes you, makes you hesitate, and may completely stop you practicing altogether. I remember when I was a young monk, I heard one senior monk He wasn't a meditative monk, not a forest monk, but he's a monk who spent a lot of time studying, reading books. He said, Nibbana is impossible in this day and age. You can't practice and realize Nibbana in the modern world. And that monk had a reputation as a scholar, so he seemed to know things. He certainly could read a lot and remember a lot of the Buddhist teachings, and yet he had this strong belief it's impossible to reach Nibbana. And I heard him, and at first I thought, oh no, I'm too late. And it did kind of sap my motivation when I first heard that. But I was lucky. I also met good teachers like Ajahn Chah, who said, well, enlightenment is possible. Human beings can attain Nibbana in this very life, in this day and age. And myself and many other people believe, Luang Por Chah had done that. He certainly seemed to be somebody who was very committed to the practice and was willing to set aside all other things to prove the fact that you can get enlightened even in this day and age. So that was my good fortune, meeting Ajahn Chah and some other good teachers as well. But it's a very common thing you hear said. A big obstacle is people who say, "Oh, it's impossible to get enlightened. Don't bother. Go to the beach instead, or something else." There's always good excuses not to put forth effort in your practice. That's a starting point for wisdom, isn't it? You say, well, when you start practicing, true, you don't know for sure. You're not enlightened yet. When you start practicing, you're not enlightened. That's the whole point. That's why you're practicing. You don't know. But we are fortunate that there are teachers, even in this day and age, even if the Buddha's not with us. And also, there will be some aspects of the practice that you can prove for yourself quite quickly. You may not feel you've attained Nibbana yet, but maybe you start meditating if you bring yourself to practice some mindfulness, and quite quickly you can see, your mind settles down, you're more calm, there's more clarity, and you notice a few things about yourself, what's good, what's bad, what needs to be developed, what needs to be abandoned. You notice that more and more, quite quickly, perhaps. And you can see, if I keep practicing, maybe this kind of knowledge and wisdom will grow. So in the end, doubts are overcome through the practice. But it's always an obstacle in the beginning, what other people say about the practice. There'll always be the doubters who say, oh, it's a waste of time, you can't do it, it's not possible. And it could even be a monk or a nun who says that. There's a famous comment Ajahn Chah made on a few occasions. Somebody said, oh, the Buddha's no longer with us today, which is true. And the Buddha was born in India all those years ago, got enlightened in India all those years ago, and there were people getting enlightened with the Buddha all those years ago. But it can't happen today. And Ajahn Chah just said, so the Buddha can only get enlightened or arise in India. Is that true? And in that sense, he was referring to the Buddha as symbolizing enlightenment, because actually, if you study the Buddhist teachings, one of the ways they describe an enlightened person, an arahant, is they actually are a Buddha of one kind. They're not a Sammasambuddha, they're not perfectly self-enlightened, but they have the same experience of Nibbana and the same purity of mind, freedom from greed, anger and delusion as a Buddha. So in one sense they're a Buddha. And when Ajahn Chah said, can't a Buddha arise? He was living in Thailand when he said it. So he said, so can't a Buddha arise in Thailand? What he was meaning was, if you practice the Buddhist teachings, cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, then the results can come wherever you are in the world. Nowadays, the Buddhist teachings have been spread all around the world. There's no limit to the light of the wisdom of the Buddha. It can grow anywhere, can arise anywhere, in somebody's mind, anywhere, if they practice. And Luang Por Chah, we believe, proved that you can get enlightened in this modern age in Thailand, which is not India. And you practice in whichever country you're living in. And I know there's a few different people watching this from around the world. Wherever you are, if you apply this Noble Eightfold Path, try to cultivate it, you'll get results. How much results, how quick, how slow, it just depends, doesn't it, on your efforts and how things go for you and your particular karma. But the Buddhist teachings are universal, and they bring their result wherever you are, wherever they're practiced. Enlightenment is possible in the mind of anyone, barring someone who maybe has made a lot of bad karma. They're going to have to be very patient, and possibly in this life they can't get enlightened. But majority of people have the potential for enlightenment within them. Wherever you are, if you apply yourself to these teachings, wisdom can arise. The light that arises from one moment of mindfulness is possible for us all, isn't it? Understanding what is good and bad karma, abandoning thoughts of greed, selfishness, anger, hatred, worry, fear, all the different kinds of suffering we have, the darkness of the mind, you can abandon them. As soon as you establish mindfulness, you can abandon them. If you keep practicing that, then you'll abandon more and more. The light will grow up more, the darkness will fade out more. Sooner or later, your mind will be fully light. However long it takes, it will happen, won't it, if you keep going. In the beginning, you practice, your mindfulness is not very strong, not very clear. When you try meditating, as we all know, your mind is full of thoughts and doubts and worries, and you're falling asleep, and all the kind of normal obstacles every meditator faces, every practitioner faces. They have obstacles in their work, in their family, in their life. Everyone has that, sure. But if you keep practicing, then your ability to shed the light of wisdom on your experience, on your mind, will grow. So it's like, you start off with a candle in your hand to go, and you're going into this dark place where a candle doesn't produce much light, just a little bit of light around where the candle flame is. It's enough to get by, maybe. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. But then as you practice more and your mindfulness gets a bit better and your understanding of things better, and you recognize more clearly where you're attaching to negative mind states perhaps, and you decide, I really should let this go, and you're doing that, then it's like you move on from a candle flame to a torch light or some kind of electric light or something, and the level of light in your mind improves. And you keep going, you keep practicing, and you're reflecting on things, understanding things better. In the end, maybe your mind completely becomes very bright, very peaceful, happy, through the light of wisdom and understanding that you develop through the practice. And this isn't just remembering the words of the Buddha. It's another problem, another part of delusion. Often we hear the Dhamma and we think, now I understand. But that's only the beginning. Then you have to practice it and actually know what the Buddha said through your own experience. But that's like real light, the real light coming into your mind, into your heart, where you know an unwholesome Dhamma as an unwholesome Dhamma, and you know this is to be abandoned, and you have the mindfulness and the effort and the energy and the wisdom to do that. So a bit of greed arises, you let it go. Anger arises, you let it go, and you keep doing that. If you keep doing that, eventually it stops coming up, doesn't it? The darkness is gone. It disappears. You just have to keep practicing until that moment. Whether it takes 1 year or one lifetime or many lifetimes, doesn't matter. You just keep going. Maybe I'll just say this much for today, recollecting the Buddha and his message and encouraging you all to keep up your practice. And after this there'll be a chance, if you have any questions, we'll try to answer them for you.